Hello, and welcome to Better Money with the MAIAs, where we speak to the latest winners of the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards to find out how they're helping other people to become better with money and perhaps learn some useful tips for ourselves too. With 2/3 of the world's population unable to answer very basic questions about money and finance becoming more complex all the time, we need as much help as we can get. I'm Michael Gilmore, co-founder of the MAIAs, and that's exactly why we started the awards. This week, we're chatting with Tracy Hall, author of The Last Victim, a special commendation in this year's anti-scam category. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Better Money with the MAIAs. And this week we have with us Tracy Hall. Tracy Hall was the special commendation, I believe, in the anti-scam category. And I'm going to let her tell you all about that in a second, but I'm going to say two things first. First of all, congratulations for that.
Thank you so much.
You know, it's one of the things why we do this podcast is I actually get to say congratulations to winners, people, because otherwise we were just on the internet and it was an email and it was much less fun. So very many congratulations. And also the anti-scam category was brand new this year. We didn't know what to expect. And honestly, I don't know what to expect next year because every entry was so different. But it's an increasingly important category and an increasingly important way for people to approach financial education, financial literacy. So thank you very much for entering. Congratulations for winning. But please tell us your story because it's an amazing story.
Yeah, it is a very big story. So, my name's Tracy Hall. I'm now an author, a speaker, and an advocate for victims of intimate fraud. And back in 2017, I woke up to a Crime Stoppers video online of an unidentified man being arrested outside of his Bondi Beach apartment for swindling 15 victims out of $7.6 million. And I knew in that moment, without a shadow of a doubt, that man was my boyfriend of almost 2 years. Yeah. And my boyfriend, Max Tavita, was a chief investment officer for a family office. But in fact, it wasn't Max Tavita. His name was Hamish McLaren, and he was one of Australia's most notorious conmen. And Hamish stole my life savings. He stole $317,000. And I think it's fair to say in the process, he also stole my ability to trust.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you found out watching the TV news?
It was actually a Crime Stoppers video. So it was an online article and a girlfriend had sent it to me. I had missed a call from Hamish the day before, or Max as I knew him on that day. I missed a call from him and I spent the rest of the day trying to get in touch with him because we were in constant contact. We were in a long-term committed relationship. We'd just been away for the weekend and I was getting pretty worried that night when I hadn't spoken to him. And by the next morning, I was absolutely frantic. So I actually called the local police station where he lived and asked them to do a wellness check on him because I thought there'd been an accident. I thought something had happened. And while they were off doing that, a girlfriend of mine called me and it was pretty early and I thought that's a bit weird. And she said, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm absolutely exhausted. I haven't slept. I'm really worried about Max." And she said to me, "I'm about to send you a link to an article and you're going to open it and you're going to call me straight back." And that was the article that I opened on my phone that morning. And that is when I found out his real name. That is when I found out he was a criminal. That is when I found out he had stolen many, many millions of dollars from people. And that's sort of, I guess, when my connections and conversations and dealings with the detectives and the police officers started.
Wow. I want to jump forward quite a long way. But we're going to come back to obviously lots of, because what's incredible about this story, that's sadly a very common story, an increasingly common story of money being stolen by people that we think are loved ones. Or I like the phrase you used, intimate fraud, because sometimes the phrase romance scam is used and it sounds wrong. Right? And I think this is very different. But you've turned this into a positive. And I'd love to hear about how you did that and how you went about that.
Well, what actually happened in Australia was while the police were investigating the crimes that Hamish had committed, there was an investigative journalist from our key masthead here, the Australian newspaper, and he was interested in writing about what had happened to me. And as he got to know me and found out more about my story and went along to a couple of the court hearings with me, we sort of uncovered the extent of what Hamish had been up to. And that investigation with that journalist turned into one of the biggest hit podcasts here in Australia and globally, called Who the Hell is Hamish? And through that investigation, the journalist Greg Berup had discovered that Hamish had stolen somewhere between $80 and $1 million from victims all over the world. So his investigations took him far and wide. That was back in 2019 as we were going through the criminal process. So there was quite a lot of media surrounding that, and a lot of people wanted to talk to me during that time, and of course the criminal trial, so there was a lot of media in that time. And then, quite honestly, I just went back to my life because I had to rebuild my finances, I had to rebuild myself, and I had to rebuild my life. And so I just put my head down and my bum up, and I did that. And then in 2023, I decided to write about my experiences. So I wrote my memoir, The Last Victim, and that was published last year in 2024. And since that has been published, the requests to speak and to educate and to advocate in this space became so great that now this is my full-time job. So I've turned my hand to this cause, and really just using my experience to help educate others, to advocate on behalf of victims who are still not in a position to speak about what happened to them. I'm working with government. I'm working with different organisations to find ways to support victims more, to educate the population, and really just to be a voice on behalf of people that aren't able to, I guess, come forward at this point.
Yeah, very much. So this is an occasion where normally I have a script of set questions that I ask people, and these all go out completely out of the window with your situation. But what I suppose, when in that work you're doing now, a lot of it will be with people who have also been defrauded or scammed, and there's obviously an enormous amount of pain that they're in immediately, because it's not just a financial thing, is it? I mean, it's a very emotional thing. What advice can you give them? What advice do you give them in terms of making those first steps away from just the trauma into the next stage of dealing with things?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, very rarely in these cases is the financial loss the hardest thing that a victim will need to deal with. Yes, it is very impactful, and it's incredibly, it impacts every part of your life. So there's no denying that the money plays a role. But it is the psychological and the emotional impact and betrayal that I feel has the greatest impact and takes the longest to recover from. So the advice that I give to people, I don't know if it's advice, because I think every situation is very different. Everyone's sort of position in life is different. For me, I was a single mum with a 6-year-old at the time, so there was a lot of other pressures for me. But other people, they're in relationships and they've lost money, and perhaps they haven't told their partner that this has happened. So there's a dynamic there that they need to sort of work through. But what I do say is that, I just have so much compassion and empathy, because I know exactly how they're feeling. Everybody has a lot of self-blame, and that is perpetuated by the victim-blaming narratives that are out there, the way the media talks about these crimes, your own internalized thoughts about, how could I be so stupid? These kind of, people are typically very tough on themselves because everything is very clear in retrospect.
Yeah.
So, what I say is just try and have an enormous amount of self-compassion. What really helped me was the moment that I realized I was a victim of crime. This was just not a bad mistake or a bad decision that I'd made. I was targeted, I was groomed, I was coerced over a very long period of time. And most scams operate in this framework too. The social engineering that goes on to get people to do what they need to do for these criminals to earn money. It's psychological warfare. And what I say to these people is, you are a victim of crime. You were targeted. This is not your fault. And they are very, very difficult things to comprehend when you're in that initial moment of shame and guilt and things like that. But they're the things that I continue to reiterate. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of victim support. So those pathways have to be sought independently in most cases, and self-funded, which is difficult when you've lost all your money, right?
Oh my God.
It's actually better if you're a victim of a violent crime to be honest in terms of the support that you receive post an event like this. So, that's sort of hard to get your head around as well, and they're kind of some of the things that I'd like to see changed. But these are slow moving beasts, but we have to start somewhere.
And that's, what an awful thing to say, but for it to be true, that it's better to be a victim of violent crime than financial.
Yeah.
Because there's more support. Do you think that's because the nature of scamming and fraud is so new and it's become so wide so recently? I mean, obviously it's not new, but it was smaller scale, more individual, and now it's become so common.
Yeah, and I think there's confusion, Michael, around who owns the victim. I know that sounds weird, but who does the victim belong to? Who is the victim the responsibility of? So if someone breaks into your house and threatens you violently and steals your television, you go to the police.
Yeah.
You are protected and supported by law enforcement, because there are rules and there are laws and there are governing, regulations and codes around that. Now, if someone infiltrates your computer or your mobile device and hacks in through your bank account, or you on paper freely send them money, but because you have been coerced and manipulated, is that the bank? Is it social media? Is it the telco? Is it a national anti-scam body? Is it the government? Is it the police?
Yeah.
And so there's this real confusion around, this pathway for a victim. And, we don't have the laws and the codes to say that this is a crime. And in a lot of ways, I would consider myself lucky. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but the fact that this was a very, very big criminal case, it was handled by the police, the detectives, it went through a criminal process, and he was convicted and sentenced to jail. Yeah. Most people who lose money to scams and fraud will never ever see that process happen with them, because it's a transnational digital crime that is probably being perpetrated by a victim of human trafficking, in fact. So the perpetrator of the crime never comes to justice in the majority of cases that we see. My case is very, very unique in that sense. So I did see justice. I did go through a criminal process. So I am a victim of crime. I'm on a victims register. Most people who lose money to scams and fraud, they will never, ever become in that category. And so then that sort of that realization and that coming to terms with is just like this open jigsaw puzzle, really.
Yes.
So it's complex and it's difficult, and I think we're trying to solve it, but again, it's going to take time.
Yeah, 100%. And it's very interesting. Lucky, but very different, I think, is probably the right word to use. But does that make you actually a far better spokesperson for this subject, because you've been all the way through the process, which most people can't. So you can actually show where this could go and where change could come in for other types of crimes. Is that possible? Can you be used as a text case?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, on Thursday, I'm speaking at an Australian Federal Police conference on cybercrime and using my insights and what I learned, what the great things were about going through that process and what the challenges have been as well. You know, there are some challenges with this process too. And you're exactly right. You know, what I experience, I call it one-to-one intimate fraud. Really wildly unusual. It's
Yes.
very, they're not, it's not an odd story. We've heard about these stories from the beginning of time. But in terms of the amount of money that's been lost and what we're hearing about and what we're seeing globally, it's not with an intimate partner. You know, they are these sort of criminal syndicates that are targeting transnationally. So it's very, very different. And I guess what is still trying to be worked out is how does law enforcement play a role in that? How do the banks play a role in that? We have such strict border security in Australia. You can't bring an apple into Australia without being frisk searched.
Yes,
Yet,
true.
you know,
Yeah.
your bank account can be fleeced within 3 minutes by someone operating in a country that you've never heard of. So,
Yeah.
you know, it seems wild that this is possible, but of course it's just as you said, it's just exploded so quickly. Technology makes it possible. They are way ahead of us in terms of AI. So I think there's a role for all of the parts of the ecosystem to play, whether law enforcement and digital borders is part of their remit.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
I think one of the things, there's been a positive development in Australia where you've been one of the first countries to actually curb what the social media companies are allowed to do in terms of age gating. It would be good to see countries start to do that on who the advertisers are on these systems,
Yeah.
because there was a recent article I think in the New York Times suggesting, because no one can ever know, but suggesting that maybe 50% of Meta's revenue is from criminal organizations, which
Yeah.
is mind-boggling that could be true and that they can pretend to get away with that.
Yeah. And let's pretend it's half of that and it's still wild.
Yes.
And, you know, I've worked for US tech companies and I understand that share price is in part driven by an active user base.
Yeah.
So if there was knowledge of a percentage of the active user base being fraudulent or bad actors and they wiped them off the base tomorrow, you can only imagine what would happen to the share price, which,
Yeah.
you know, and then you kind of layer that with advertising revenue and you
Yeah.
can see why these decisions aren't being made, you
Well, I was
know.
trying to explain. We were having a chat with someone the other day, and it's not only that, but they say they can't do it because they need to hire more people, despite the fact that Meta employees are possibly the most profitable employees per person of any company in the world, almost. So they could easily hire double the number of people. But if they did that, they'd hire those people, and those people would be actually stopping revenue. So it would be, yeah,
I'm sure there's an AI for that. I'm sure that there's some smart enough engineers there that could create some type of algorithm because they're very good at algorithms.
they're very
I'm
good.
sure there'd be some type of algorithm that could, you know, in fact determine or detect. And I'm sure some of that stuff goes on. Is it enough?
No,
I think the collective view is no.
yeah,
But yeah, it does seem wild that they would be taking so much revenue from what they may know is bad
yeah.
actors.
And to take it into sort of let's say a prescriptive or educational sense, because when you go out and talk to people, I'm sure, I mean, I would ask immediately, what can I do? Now, obviously, you've become an expert in broader scams than just the one-to-one intimate fraud. But what can people do if they are to carry on trusting? What can they actually do to engage with the world but to try and reduce the likelihood of this happening to them?
Yeah. The short answer is I tell them to trust but verify.
Okay. Yeah.
But more broadly, I think education is key. If ignorance is not bliss in this case. Like we have this knowledge, we know it is out there. So what I try and do is say, hey, you might not know, but there are, cities of people and criminals that are set up to target Australians or wherever I am talking.
Yeah.
And explain to them how these operations work. Now, that on its own blows their mind.
Yes.
So Southeast Asian syndicates, pig butchering, as they're termed, horrible term, but in Myanmar and Cambodia and what's happening there, Yahoo Boys in in Nigeria, and how that is sort of really exploded and escalated sextortion scams, particularly towards teenagers in affluent countries. So that starting point as an education opens people's minds to go, okay, this is what we're up against. Most people have no idea that these things exist.
Yeah.
And then I explain, there is a bunch of things that people can do. There is a bunch of technical tools that people can use that aren't difficult to operate. So reverse image search. If you're buying something off Facebook Marketplace, do a reverse image search. Here's how you do it. Here's how to look up a financial advisor's license details or a band register list. Here are the links. Voice cloning. I explain how, the criminals are using AI now to fool people, and we don't know what is real and what isn't. So talk about voice cloning and show them how that is actually done very easily. And perhaps you want to have a family password.
Yeah.
Or perhaps you want to change your voicemail setting to the default setting and not have a personalized setting. Really, really simple things that people can do and be aware of. And this is not about scaring them into the world, because what we don't want is a bunch of people who have fear as the baseline for action. Mm-hmm. We want people to be engaged, vigilant, interested in what's happening. And so that's broadly what I try and do in terms of the education piece. And then, there are workshops where I can take seniors through, here are the types of scams that you're up against, and here's where you're being targeted, and here are the 5 things you can do to protect yourself. And so people feel empowered rather than scared.
That's great. I mean, I love the fact you talk about seniors, potentially because I'm heading that way myself. But it seems
we all are at some point.
At some point, right? It's better than the alternative of not getting there. Let's put it that way.
That's right.
But I see it. It's such a desperate, sad crime, and that seniors are getting targeted so much by scammers, and that's why I was picking up on the fact you said intimate fraud rather than romance scams, because it seems that the same people, the same process, the same gangs use similar ways because older people are lonely and have no companionship. And even to the extent where they'll target deliberately widows because they're lonely. And you think, that's awful.
Yeah, 100%.
So when you talk to those kinds of groups, and because obviously we all know that every 5 years you age, tech gets a little bit harder to relearn, and there's always something new. When you talk to seniors, how do you get around that? Is it again just tech? Saying, the tech, everything, the whole thing, the whole subject?
You sit in a room and you teach them, and I think this is where some corporates are probably falling a little short, where there's lots of education out there. It says set up your 2-factor authentication. Mm-hmm. Now, my mum's 78. She has no idea what 2-factor authentication is. But when I say to her, Mum, sometimes when you log in to something online and then you get a text message to confirm that it's you, that's 2-factor. So that's got your email address and your mobile number. There's 2 things. Like, you just break it down into language that they understand. I pretend, when I'm talking and doing content and stuff, I pretend I'm sitting next to my mom having a cup of tea and explaining it to her.
Yeah.
And I think there's this sort of, there's a risk that we use language that is too complicated. And this goes for financial literacy more broadly. For children, for women, for adults, for seniors, why can't we just talk about things with words that people understand, or give them an analogy or something like that? Don't overwhelm them. Give them 5 things. Don't give them 10. Give them the 5 most important things. And that's how I do it. And the reason that I think people listen is because I start with what happened to me.
Yeah.
And when people are sort of hit by or impacted by emotion, whether that's shock or humor or intensity or whatever it might be, and I use all of the tricks in the book if I can, people remember. There's a memory link to emotion and to stories. If you're reading a piece of paper or a flyer that you got sent from your bank or an email, because everybody's sending content around scams, no one's reading it. There's this desensitization to the messaging because all the banks, all the telcos, everyone's saying, oh, we're educating. Education doesn't work because we're educating.
Yeah.
We're sending all the comms. And I worked in marketing communications for my whole career, 27 years. And with all due respect, I just don't think they're impactful enough, because you get, how many emails do people get a day? How many things do people get that they don't read because it's in language they don't understand? There's no emotional attachment to it. Sadly, like anything in life, we don't really take notice till it directly impacts us or someone we love. And so these are the things that I try and get around when I'm talking to people. And sometimes I just think you have to be in the room and you have to show a level of empathy and compassion and meet them where they're at. And it's the same on the other end of the spectrum with teenagers. When I talk to teenagers and parents about sextortion, you've got to meet them where they're at. So for kids, it's, I say, I'm never going to tell you not to send a nude. That's not my job. You do you, but here's what you need to know about what's happening with that content.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to know about who your new friend on Snapchat is. And here's what you need to do if something ever happens.
Yeah.
And that's the way I approach it. I'm pretty straight shooter, but I just don't think there's any other way to get through to people.
Yeah, no, very true. And the thing you're saying about marketing and communications, I mean, it's that long ago, I remember there was a study done in the US, and it was that people were getting, I think it was something in the region of 8,000 marketing messages a day. But what's amazing about that study was it was brilliantly done in 2007, before the invention of the iPhone. So before social media was at the end of our hands all the time.
Yeah.
So we now know it must be 5 times that, which is insane idea that we might be getting 50,000 marketing messages a day. But how many of them are anti-scam ones? 1, 2, and the rest of them are so... We're pushing against an enormous tide. Now, how's that progressing for you? Because, as you said, you wrote the book. The book was published in 2024.
Yep.
And I think you're going on book tours. Is that right? I hear.
Well, I mean, surprisingly, maybe not surprising. I don't know. I was shocked, but the book is being launched paperback in the UK at the end of this September, and will be in the US at the end of January 2026. So both a surprise to me, but very, very excited. Hamish has victims all over the world. So I do not doubt that once these books hit these markets, that more people will come forward and tell their stories, which is exactly what I intended it to do, not just about potentially being a victim of Hamish, but really just, lifting that stigma, because what happens often when I talk is, I did a talk last Friday and 5 people came up to me afterwards and told me their stories about themselves, their mum, someone they knew. Everyone wants to tell you their stories afterwards. So, I mean, that's encouraging for me. So, yes, the book is launching end of September in the UK, end of January 26 in the US. So I'll go over there and do some media and promote and do some speaking. And, I'm just keen to spread the message and as far and wide as possible to ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone else.
Yeah, please. We need that. It's really going to be very, very valuable. It's something that I think, obviously at the MAIAs we focus on financial literacy, and one of the reasons we focus on scams is because it has been seen that there is a lower likelihood of being scammed the more financially literate you are, but it's only a lower likelihood. It's the weird thing is that there is a scam for everyone, and literally there are some scams you won't fall for unless you're sufficiently financially literate. You have to know a bit more before you can fall for that scam. And it's incredible, the complexity. But what we need more than anything else is people like you to go and spread that message and give people a reason to learn, which I think is what you're doing. Which brings me to another point we skipped over earlier on, because I wanted to get to, the message, the lessons, the education. But how long did it take for you to decide that you could do this? Because you must have wanted to curl up in a ball and for the whole world to go away, right?
Well, I did that for a few years.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was a part of my life for a while. I feel lucky. I had a 6-year-old child at home that needed me, and that got me out of bed every morning. And I had a job. I had a financial lifeline, and I had a very good job. And it's not lost on me that I had that.
Yeah.
So I had to get back to work, and I had to get up and make lunches every day and get my daughter to school. So those two things really kept me from lying in bed and crying too much. But, frankly, I didn't talk to the journalist for over a year, and I was encouraged to, and I didn't feel strong enough. I didn't feel like I wanted to talk to anyone about it. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I was beating myself up. I wanted it just to go away. And when I eventually spoke to him, and I tell you what day it was. It was the day that we went along to the plea hearing, where we found out, and this was more than a year after he'd been arrested, maybe a year and 3 months or something after he'd been arrested. And I went along to the hearing thinking that there would be many people there. There was no one there. And the journalist came with me and 2 of my girlfriends. And Hamish appeared, and that was the day that we found out that he had pled guilty. And the DPP, the Department of Director of Public Prosecution, who was acting on behalf of the victims, had a document called the Statement of Facts. And that was there was all this stuff going on between the judge and the defence and him. And at the end of it, we spoke to him, and the journalist said, Greg Barrup said, "Can we have a copy of that document?" And because he was a journalist, he got a copy of that document, and we went across to a cafe across the road, and we poured through this document, which was 32 pages of all of the facts that went into the case against Hamish McLaren. And that is where we found out there were 15 victims. That is where we found out the extent of the money that he'd lost, under which circumstances, how long he'd been at this game.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I thought, oh my gosh, it's not just me.
Yeah.
I'm not, there were many men as part of the case. There were very successful business people. And in that moment I thought, oh, this is huge. Like, this is, it sounds weird, but it wasn't until that moment that I realized, like, we were dealing with a very sophisticated criminal. And that is the bit where I thought, you know what, this story needs to be told so that nobody else ever falls prey to him again. And so I think that is the moment that I felt like I could do it. But then there was another period of time between then and when the story actually launched where I got really nervous. Again, I was recommended by friends and family not to be involved, not to speak about it. It would ruin potentially my career prospects. I would maybe find it difficult to cope with. There was a lot of concern around these types of things, and I thought long and hard about it. And because it's not entirely easy to put yourself out into the media, not knowing how that story will be told, what people will say about it, what response you'll get. But I did feel strongly that one of the reasons this happened to me was because I'd never heard a story like this before. The image that I had of the person that got lost money to scams or fraud was of an uneducated, lonely, middle-aged woman sitting in her lounge room looking for love on the internet.
Yeah.
And I never thought it would be me. I never thought, I see those stories and I think, what an idiot. I'd never do that. That'd never happen to me. And yet here I am. So that was a really big motivation for me to do it, because there is a scam for everybody. So many people go through this, but they just don't talk about it because of shame and embarrassment, career damage, all of those things. And I thought, if I can use this experience to educate and inform and help others, then it will have mattered. It will have been worth it, I guess.
No, that's very true, very powerful. Thank you for that. And then I suppose, because I asked you earlier on about education and what you say to people about not being scammed. Do you tell the people that you meet who say they've been scammed, do you suggest to them be public about it? Or do people sometimes volunteer that they want to be public? And do you say to them, okay, I wouldn't do that if I were you, or I would do it? Do you not have those conversations? What would you say to someone in that situation?
I do have those conversations quite a lot. A lot of people believe that by going to the media, they'll get some type of justice.
Yeah.
Because in some cases, they haven't been able to get traction from law enforcement. They haven't been able to get traction from their bank or, the Financial Complaints Authority. They are still very, very frustrated that they have lost money. They're still trying to recoup. Now, my advice in terms of going to the media is varied. If people want to do that, that's up to them. Some publications won't touch these stories now because if the perpetrator has not been prosecuted, then there is a chance that the publication might be, sued for defamation or what have you. And that has happened. That has happened in Australia. So some of the publications are quite shy about this because of the way in which fraud is very difficult to prosecute. And I mean, everyone likes to write about a scam story, but again, there's no recourse for the victims other than just telling the story. So I say it's completely up to them. I think what I do say is that they need to be in a strong position to do so.
Yes.
Emotionally, because people say things. There are responses. Like I've got a rule for myself: never read the comments. Never read the comments.
Never. Yeah.
Because and the way I look at that is, nobody's been through what I've been through, and so they would have no understanding of the nuances of how it played out. And then on top of that, there is nothing that anyone could say to me that would be worse than what I've already said to myself through this process. And that's kind of a powerful position to be in, even though it sounds a little bit sadistic, but it's true. And so I think, well, bring it on. Say to me what you will. I have already said it to myself, but I've moved on from there, and I've worked through it. And, you don't know, you weren't in my shoes, so you will never know. And I hope you never know, and I wish them well. But I don't read the comments. Don't read the comments.
No, only read the comments about other people's stuff, because obviously below the line is great fun about other people's stuff, but never about yourself. That makes perfect sense. No, and I think that's really valuable because, and what you're saying there's no recourse. It reminded me of a conversation I was having just the other day, and I learned something new, that one of them, an increasingly common scam is targeting the victims of scams and saying, we can help you get your money back, which is the most awful concept. That someone already in harm's way, you go after them again. Because
reimbursement scams.
Because there's no recourse. They know that they've created a problem that they can try and offer a fake solution to. It's just, and there's, I would have thought I might know what scams are out there, given my job, my part-time job. And there's a new one every whatever it is, week, month, year, that it
There's
just comes out of the woodwork.
crazy statistic that says something like 40% of people who are scammed or lose money to scams and fraud will be re-scammed. It's like 40% will be re-scammed or victims of a secondary scam or recovery scam within 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I look at that and I think, there's, again, who owns the victim? Who owns the victim's longevity in terms of their recovery? And I think there's a very big responsibility, but a very big opportunity for the collective organisations that look at this issue, maybe it's the banks, maybe it's the government, that says, how do we help victims post reimbursement or not? And then how do we actually, how do we protect them from going through a secondary scam? And how do we deal with that? What language do we use? How do we nurture them through the next 2 years so that they aren't an easy target or a soft target for the secondary scam to come? I don't think that's been kind of even tackled. I think everyone's sort of back at the beginning.
Yes, very much. I do. I mean, sometimes I try and give a little bit of credit to the world that does financial education and these subjects. I think this is new. We are at the beginning of this as an industry, and that's where I try and give them credit and just say, okay, we are moving on towards better times, hopefully, but we need to move fast because other people are moving faster than us. And in terms of that, do you get any traction from those organizations when you group them together, the banks, the police, the authorities that could be responsible? Do any of them talk any kind of game saying, yes, we'll come together and do something?
I think you put it exactly perfectly. I think they're still trying to solve the beginning of the problem, quite frankly. And I think the intentions are strong. Specifically in Australia, we've got this scams prevention framework code coming in, and the intention, I feel the intention is strong and the intention is right. Whether it's possible and is possible quickly enough is probably another, question mark. But, I sit in these conferences and everyone can discuss the issues and outline the problems and see where the gaps are. But I guess it's the plugging of those gaps, and it's doing it fast enough, and it's collaborating. Sharing data is a massive issue. Apportioning blame, everyone trying to cover themselves. These sorts of things are challenges. But I do see positive intent, which gives me hope. Sadly, banks aren't the fastest moving organisations in the world. Neither are governments. So I would like to see it happen a bit quicker. And my response to the government framework last year was create a victim pathway that is one pathway. Here in Australia, there are probably 5 or 6 places you need to report when you lose money or your identity's compromised.
Yeah.
And there is not one clear victim pathway. So if that's the case, again, who owns the victim to know what to do in the 2 years post a scam? Because they've probably dealt with multiple different agencies. And, of course, that has to be funded. And, of course, that has to be resourced. So it brings up a whole bunch of other questions that feel a little bit big right now when they're still trying to work out how to secure the digital borders to our country.
Yeah.
So which problem do they solve first, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's definitely not an easy one. I don't have any jealousy over the job, but I think that, as you're saying, there is an improvement in the intention, and there's also, I suppose, more an increasing acknowledgement of the scale of the problem, and those two things hopefully can come together to some kind of will to do something. But I also think, I do hate saying this, obviously, in a year which is going to have the Ashes coming up quite soon, that Australia is doing incredibly well compared to other countries on this subject. But you may feel it's behind, but I think it's ahead of a lot of other places.
I hear that a lot, and I would say that the intention to collaborate across sectors is strong.
Yeah.
Now it's about kind of removing the barriers and the silos and the the hurdles that will come with really strong collaboration and sharing, and then we have to look beyond our own borders and figure out how we break down those barriers internationally, because law enforcement have to work with international law enforcement. We have to find a way to, the money doesn't stay in Australia. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely not. To me, so, it's interesting that I don't know if you've heard of this, but Thailand's tourism industry has been hit really, really hard by the pig butchering scam.
Oh, right.
Because there was a film made about, at the beginning of 2024, it was released, Chinese film called No More Bets. And it was about someone being kidnapped and sent into a scamming center and not allowed to leave until they'd scammed that certain amount. And it wasn't well known, but it became a popular film. And Thailand's tourism from China is still half the level of what it was before COVID.
Wow.
So there's like 5 million people a year are choosing not to go to Thailand on holiday because they've seen this film and they know about the scams. So you think there are ways of doing this. We can let people know. It can have an impact. They can listen. Bizarrely, 5 million people are listening that probably wouldn't get kidnapped, and yet other people are still getting scammed because even though they've seen the film. So it just needs to be joined up in so many different ways. Yep. Honestly, Tracy, this has been such an inspiring session, and thank you. First of all, I'm going to say thank you for your work, because what you're doing, I think, is we just need this to be done. We can reach people, and because you've got such a personal story and you're being so open and transparent about it, I think it will reach people in a way that a lesson in a school won't reach. So thank you so much for that. But I've also got to say thank you for entering the MAIAs and for coming to see us today.
Well, thank you for the commendation. Yeah, it was such a great surprise.
Well, someone I met, a fellow Australian of yours, just the other day, who was like, no, we didn't win. We were special commendation. I said, you're on the podium. Everyone on the podium is a winner. We don't hand out awards just for the sake of it. We have whole categories. Just this last year that didn't have any winners, because if it's not good enough, it's not good enough. And I always think that anyone who's in our podium was probably good enough to have won. It was all very close. So, congratulations for that. And just keep this work up, because it's so valuable what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. And it's great to be part of the community as well now. I've met some incredible people, and it's great to be sharing knowledge and learning so much from everyone. There's some great people involved.
Thank you. And keep sharing. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Better Money with the MAIAs. If you found it useful and would like to learn more from other winners of the MAIA Awards, please subscribe to this podcast wherever is easiest for you. You can also visit our website, which is maiawards.org, or follow the Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards on LinkedIn and other social media. Thank you, and we hope you'll join us again soon.